previous video, we discussed the accountability principle, and that principle requires your multi-academy trust or school to demonstrate that it processes personal information in accordance with the UK GDPR. And a good way for you to do this is to create a record of processing activities, or ROPA. And in fact, it is a requirement under the GDPR that you do keep a ROPA. And that means documenting the personal information that you process in order to identify why you process that information, about who you process that information, what the information is that you are processing, who you might share that information with, including any international transfers that you might make, how long you keep that information for, and a general description of the security measures that you've adopted to keep that information safe. Now, it's often helpful to keep additional information on your ROPA, such as the lawful basis that you rely on to process that data. So, it might be a requirement under the GDPR, but are there other reasons why you should keep a ROPA? Well, yes. The first being oversight. Your ROPA is a live document that should be kept under regular review and updated as and when your processing activities change. And this forces you, in a good way, to keep track of the data that you're processing. And in turn, that ensures that you're complying with the data protection legislation. So, in other words, if you don't know what data that you're processing, it's going to be very difficult for you to explain how you're complying with the data protection legislation. And this leads into accountability and governance. You already know from this video alone that you're required to demonstrate compliance. Well, your ROPA, providing it's accurate and up to date, will provide you with a clear and comprehensive record of how your MAT or school is doing things. Your ROPA also provides the foundation for other requirements, such as privacy notices, and that's because the information that you will record on your ROPA is exactly the type of information that you need to provide to your data subjects through your privacy notices. So now that we know we need a ROPA and why, you might be asking, how should you create one? Well, the first time you create a ROPA, it might seem like a big task, and that's just because of the volume of information that you need to gather. But once you've created the initial record, it only needs to be maintained. So a good way to start off is to complete an information audit and data mapping exercise. And we would generally advise you to start broadly and move in narrow. So taking a map by way of example, the broad starting point will be to identify your departments. So, for the purpose of this example, let's take HR. Once you've identified your department, you can engage your key stakeholders. And that's because your stakeholders understand your systems, the data that you process, and how those systems process the data. So in the context of HR, we might be consulting the HR director or HR manager. And from this broad starting point, we need to break it down. We need to bring it more narrow. And that's because our ROPA needs to be granular. We need to avoid generic entries. So in HR, that can be broken down into recruitment, training, appraisals, etc. And once we've identified these granular items, each of these questions need to be answered in respect of it. Now remember, your ROPA needs to be a live document. You need to keep it under regular review. And as your MAT or school evolves and your processing activities change, you might find more granular items that you will need to add to your ROPA. Now your ROPA can be kept in any format that you find most accessible. So for example, hard copy or electronic format. We would recommend that you keep it in an electronic format, and that's so it's easier to update as and when you need to. For this purpose, we would recommend Microsoft Excel, and it's actually the software that the Information Commissioner's Office uses for its own template. And that's because it's easier to log back into Excel, update, add or remove lines as and where is required. So overall, remember, your ROPA is a live document. You need to update it as and when your processing activities and your MAT or school is evolving and changing.